in the Kalahari Desert, I'd sit on a dune top with a pride of lions, waiting for the heat to break so that we could go out and watch them hunt. I would watch the blue pride, the females playing with their cubs and with each other's cubs. I'd be as close as I am to you. They would sleep in easy piles with their paws draped over each other's faces. And I would think about my girlfriends back home. I missed my troop. I felt how much isolation and loneliness changes a person. And when I visited the States for fundraising and so forth each year, I discovered that many of my friends at home were also lonely. They may live in a city of 1 million people, but they had lost track of their group. You do not have to live in a vast desert or wild marsh to feel lonely. So after all those years of being with wildlife and seeing ourselves in them, I wanted to write a novel that would explore how much our behavior is influenced by our ancient genes that we share with these species. How much can we learn about human nature from nature itself? And also I wanted to explore how much loneliness affects us, because I had felt it deeply. I needed to find a story. I needed to find a story that would show these elements, to put all of that into a novel. I needed a plot that would paint a picture of all of this. And since we have a very strong genetic propensity to live in a group, I decided to write a story about a young girl who was forced to be raised, or to raise herself, mostly alone, without a group. How would this affect her behavior? How would she survive? One morning when Kaya was 6 years old, she watched her mother walk down the sandy lane and never come back. By the time Kaya had watched all of her family members walk down that same lane, she was 10 years old. She had been raised in the marsh, and she was tough, and she knew how to build a fire in the wood stove. She knew how to fish. But still, she was afraid, and she was hungry. Sometimes she heard night sounds she didn't know, or jumped from lightning too close. But whenever she stumbled, it was the land who caught her, until at last, at some unkind moment, the heart pain seeped away like water into sand, still there but deep. Kaya laid her hand upon the breathing wet earth, and the marsh became her mother. She learned survival from the marsh's creatures, how to collect mussels from the ravens, how to collect berries and fruits from the birds. But since she was isolated, she was afraid of people. When she saw them, she would run into the forest. She duck walked to avoid being seen by a fisherman. Kaya's behavior looked more and more like a wild female primate isolated from her troop. Drifting back to the predictable cycles of tadpoles and the ballet of fireflies, Kaya burrowed deeper into the wordless wilderness. Nature seemed the only stone that would not slip midstream. The nearby villagers rejected Kaya. They lied about her. They discriminated against her, just as lions and hyenas do with strangers. But did the villagers reject Kaya because she was different? Or was she different because they rejected her? All of these strange behaviors that she exhibited were expected. But Kaya also surprised me. Here I was, the author. I thought I was in charge. As I wrote her, I expected her to be shy and afraid. But she grew and she learned how to solve problems. Every time I threw an obstacle in her path, she solved it. And as she solved problems, she gained confidence and independence. She became gritty, even witty. For years, Kaya survived by selling mussels, but she struggled. It seemed that she could tackle anything but loneliness. And then Kaya found a feather left by a boy for her in the forest. Alone all those years, and now a connection and a language she could understand. A gentle love story followed with laughter and the primitive urges to be close. But in this story, as in nature, the selfish genes win, and the boy leaves her for his own good. Once again, Kaya weeps with the same loneliness on the same beach. There seemed to be no hope, but Kaya had learned how to read. Words gave her wings, lifted her from mere survival to soaring, as words have done for us. She could study science. She could identify the shells and feathers that she had been painting for years. She had possessed these talents for years, but now she could read and she could write them. This made her a professional. Her art, her studies, and her poetry allowed her to feel part of humanity, even as she was excluded from it. Kaya learned, and she teaches us, that even when you are excluded from a group, even when you are alone, you can solve your own problems. You can find the inner strength to do so, to excel. And when this happens, you're more likely to be accepted by someone else. We feel incomplete when we are alone because we have within us genes from millions of years of belonging to a group. Another behavior that we share with other species, of course, is language. All animals communicate, and man did not invent lying. Dishonesty is an ancient trait. Nature has made an art form of deception. Fireflies can change their flickering codes to deceive for their own benefit. Kaya learned from the wild. She learned this from the wild, and she was able to use it for her own survival. But in nature, there's a clarity in language. When a lion bares his teeth and snarls, there's very little room for misinterpretation. I know, I've been there. Ancient languages of the wild are usually clear and precise. We added complexity, which diminished clarity. The more abstract our language, the more artful and creative it became. Combine this with our vivid imaginations, and you have literature. So we know, as Kaya shows us, and we know already, that we share many instincts with other species. But perhaps what sets us apart the most is this ability to not simply communicate with each other, but to reach deep into each other's souls with mere sounds. We transformed primitive barks and yaps into songs, into reading, into poetry. This, above all else, gave Kaya the strength and a feeling of self-worth. I learned from a book that crawdads don't really sing. But I learned from my mother that if you go far enough into the wilderness, you will hear them anyway. And my mother was right. Where the crawdads sing is a real place where wild creatures still behave as they have for eons. And if you are lucky enough to find that place, you can glimpse where, why, and how we became who we are. You will see why we feel the way we do, why we speak the way we do, and why we love words. Thank you.